Hello, everybody. It is so nice to see you all. My name is Wendy Singer, and I'm Director of Education at the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. And we are thrilled to have you for part of history tonight. Tonight, we are having our first ever virtual book club. Sid Chapon is Global Operations Leadership and Global organizations, leadership, and organizational development are the cornerstone of Sid's career. Over 25 years, he built a reputation for being a strategic and trusted coach and business advisor at Publix Group, Leo Burnett Worldwide, and Deloitte Consulting. Sid has proven positive impact across industries, including professional services, integrated marketing communications, advertising, manufacturing, financial services, telecommunications, consumer packaged goods, oil and gas, and electronics. Sid is a citizen of the world and culturally astute. He's a dual citizen of the Netherlands and the United States of America. He was born in the Netherlands, lived and is based in the USA, and has operations and coaching experience in Asia Pacific, Europe, Latin America, the Middle East, and Northern America. He's a certified professional coactive coach and holds a master's degree in organizational development. Sid became involved at the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center as a volunteer in the spring of 2019 because of his passion to help individuals and move organizations forward. We are so grateful to have you, Sid. Welcome, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the book, and we're going to get everything started.
Thank you, Wendy, and hello to everybody. I was just telling Wendy, I could not be more excited to be doing this event. And as two things, just to reiterate what Wendy said, I love this book. I love to read, and I first read The Choice last spring. Somebody asked me yesterday why I picked up the book, and admittedly, somebody had encouraged me to read the Tattoo Artist of Auschwitz, and when I went to Barnes & Noble to pick that up, this book was next to it, and it said, if you love the Tattoo Artist of Auschwitz, you will love The Choice even more. So I decided to read The Choice, and the book just really resonated with me. And one of the reasons why it resonated with me, Wendy just mentioned that I am, my background is organizational leadership and development, and I'm a certified executive coach. And part of our coaching training, there's a cornerstone of coaching and development that says that people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. That people aren't broken, people don't need to be fixed, and that people have the natural instinct to live their own lives and make the right decisions for themselves. This whole notion of that the power is within you. And while I've done a lot of coaching and counseling in a professional setting, and that the people that I've worked with have not gone through such trauma and tragedies as Dr. Eger has, but I was so inspired because I deal with a lot of people that feel powerless, or people that feel like victims, or the book talks about helplessness. And I think what moved me is that the book is an example of an individual that took a horrific experience and was able to transform herself, and in so doing has transformed many other people. So I believe that The Choice is a gift to us as individuals, and I have high regard for Dr. Eger. So that's why this book, and why I'm so deeply passionate about it. And I wouldn't do it justice if I didn't also then do a little plug for Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Obviously, if you've read The Choice, Dr. Eger speaks a lot about how she has been influenced by Viktor Frankl's work. So highly recommend this as your next read. And now I have to do my job as a volunteer for the museum. This is available in the legacy shop at the museum.
Thank you, Sid.
So hopefully it'll be on then, or if you buy it on Amazon, make sure you do whatever you need to do so that the museum gets a percentage of your cost. So that's a little bit about me, why my passion is, and like Wendy said, I love to help organizations and move forward. So that's enough talking from me. And what I'd like to do is, Wendy said, we're going to open this up now for a discussion. And I have I'm an anal retentive individual, so I have some predetermined, I have some pre-selected questions that we'll ask. We're going to ask you that once I ask a question that you respond with the chat. Wendy will then kind of summarize the themes of the chat, and then we'll kind of dig into the content that you provide us. So the first question that I'd like to pose to all of you is, I've just shared with you what resonated with me with the book, and I'm curious what resonated with you about the choice and why. So if you take a moment to please share your thoughts in the chat box, we'd appreciate it.
Yep, we'll give you a minute or two, and I did just say share thoughts here in the chat section. So we'll give you a couple minutes there to think. One of our fantastic board members who was on the call is mentioning that her mother was an Auschwitz survivor from Hungary.
Okay, so that's interesting, right? That's
yes. A connection, because that is where Dr. Eger was originally from. Another thought, what resonated with me is the emphasis how her mother carried through her life. It is fascinating that one message that we can share can be so powerful and empowering. From another board member, Joy Miller, who will be moderating our program next week. So thank you for being here, Joy.
So I'm curious for the individual that shared about how Dr. Eger's mother carried her through her life. I'm curious if that person could expand on what specifically he or she is talking about. And Dr. Eger has a quote. She frequently in the book talks about, what you put in your mind, no one can take away from you. And I'm curious if that is what the individual that mentioned that is referring to.
Okay, while Joy is typing back, I want to remind people you're welcome to either send me the questions privately like you're doing, or you can put it out for everybody to see, because we might not get to all comments, and I want everyone to see your important comments and work. Okay, so while we're waiting for that, I want to just share another couple other comments from Mary. This book changed my life. One of the most powerful aspects of Dr. Eger is that she doesn't ever really stop dealing with her experience that ever comes up over and over through her whole life. Every time she makes the choice to react and respond, it isn't an instant thing, it's a process.
Yeah, I just to reflect and expand on that, I agree, and it was fascinating to me how in her book, there were a couple of examples where she said that her daughter was playing with another child and an ambulance or a siren was going off, and how even in that moment, that was a trigger for her and brought her back to the trauma that she experienced during the war. And I found it fascinating how she would acknowledge what she was feeling, understood where that feeling was coming from. And then she didn't have this sense of helplessness, if you will. She had the insight and knowledge to process through that moment. But she talks a lot about the triggers in her life that would bring her back to her horrible experience, both in Auschwitz and the death marches.
Yes, and we have a couple more comments. They did come in to me privately. I'm going to put them together as we have several people on the call who are also children of survivors and totally relate to the way the book, relate to the book based on how their parents raised them. So I think that is an important comment. There's another one I wanted to share with you quickly before it goes away. I read this book a while ago. As a therapist, I was profoundly moved by how Dr. Eger treated her patients. I wanted her to be my therapist, and I agree with you, Stacy. I did as well. I was able to use more of her approach to treatment in my own practice, and it was so very helpful.
Yeah, so can you read back the first one you mentioned, because that I was going to respond.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was saying we have several people who have written me in a private chat that they are children of survivors and can totally relate to the book based on how their parents raised them.
Yes, I want to pause on that, right? Because one of the big concepts of the book, Dr. Eger talks about how she wanted to protect her children by not sharing her past and not share her story. And there's a passage in the book where she's really, really mad at her husband when she shares with her daughter on the evening of her daughter's prom that at that age that she was in the Holocaust. So for the children of Holocaust survivors, I'm really curious to know from you, what are your thoughts about her initially thinking that she was protecting her children from her horrors? And I'd love to have you share a little bit about your perspectives on that.
So while you're thinking, I just want to make sure that I want to make sure that our setup is correct, because everyone is typing to me privately, which is wonderful, but I would love the group to be able to, it was a setup from last night's program. So I'm now going to change that so everyone can do that publicly.
Yeah, thank you, because I can't see what people, if you're sending them to Wendy, I can't see him either. And I'd love to.
Yeah, we want everyone to be able to see it. We want everyone to be able to see it. So I apologize. Thank you for bearing with us on our first virtual launch. But now we are open and ready to go. You can, when in the to box, you can now open it up, and the first on the line says everyone in the meeting. So you now can write to everyone in the whole meeting. So we'll wait to your comments. Joy did get back to you about the first comment that I wanted to say. And she said, yes, I would agree with the quote that Sid mentioned. There are so many other comments an individual absorbs, but her focus was specifically on this particular comment versus all of the negativity that surrounded her. For instance, her sister focused on the desire to have revenge, yet Dr. Eger chooses the emphasis of responsibility and positivity.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm seeing now, so yes. And so for that, was it Joy that just mentioned that?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just curious, Joy. So now I assume you're an adult. Do you think Dr. Eger made the right choice? And I'm just curious, and it's personal, but now, how did your parents share their stories with you?
I'm going to let Joy, I'm just going to unmute her because she is a wonderful person. It might have wonderful comments. Everyone's wonderful, but she is moderating the book club next week. So I want to just I want to get that quickly. So Joy, I'm going to try to unmute you and then you can talk. All right, you're unmuted, Joy.
Okay. Well, here. I guess, first of all, Sid, I'm not a child of a survivor. So I can't speak to that particular question at all. I just found it fascinating that, and my research was done with coping mechanisms of women in Auschwitz. So I found it interesting that she chose this particular coping strategy when others around her chose other things. And her closest relationship was with her sister, who was looking at it from a very negative point of view as a coping strategy to be able to adjust to the situation. I think having anger, feeling like you're going to live to be able to have some kind of a revenge, I think is a way to move us through things. But it's interesting that she chose more of a positive mechanism.
Yeah.
But I think when you get down to it, the mechanism she chose was hope more than anything else.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for the clarification. It's interesting, and it kind of goes back to what I was sharing in the beginning about my coach training, where people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, and only an individual can choose for him or herself about how to cope and move on. And you're right, it was her sense of hope and kind of clinging to some of the things that her mother had shared with her to carry her through. So I see this comment from Deborah Leonard that says, I always knew my parents were survivors. They only brought up what was age appropriate. And then somebody else said that Holocaust survivors were not encouraged to share their stories, and that many people still won't. The fact that there was no trauma-based therapy then. So I think those are really relevant comments, because I am a child of my father was in hiding during the war, and my grandfather was killed upon arrival in Auschwitz in 1944. And sadly, my father's now deceased, but my father during his life didn't speak about his war experience very much. And I'm sure a lot of that had to do with his own ability to deal with the trauma he experienced. But now, right, I, as a descendant, have there's so much information I want to know, and I wish I would have been able to have learned from him about what he dealt with that I'll never have answers to. So
I just want to share, when you're done with your thought,
yeah.
one more comment that came to me privately.
Yeah, so, and then to bring it back to the book, right, it really was this book that seemed to give Dr. Eger, that's when she gave herself permission, when she read this book, to share her story, because she then realized that, right, she wasn't the only one that survived Auschwitz, that other people had horrific experiences as well. And this is what ultimately motivated, along with her going to school to get her psychology degree, to start talking about her trauma.
Thank you. We have one more comment that I just want to share of another perspective from Sandor. My mother was also a Holocaust survivor from Hungary. She didn't talk about her experience in the Holocaust. I didn't feel it was because she wanted to protect us. I thought it was too painful for her to talk about.
Yeah, and that's true, right? I think, and that goes to, I'm going to get the name here, Sandy, who said there was no trauma-based therapy then. That the professional help wasn't there. And I would imagine that to some degree, and Dr. Eger speaks to that a little bit when she goes back home, that there were people that weren't impacted to the degree as the Jews were in Hungary or in the city in which she lived. Life kind of went on without them, and they kind of turned the other cheek and didn't really probably didn't want to know what had gone off. So very, very tragic. And I think that's why, a book such as The Choice is so important, because not only is it important for us to know the survivor stories, but also to give people permission to share their experiences. So, and Wendy, you had said there was, then I latched onto the parent survivor, but then there was another thought you had or you share, but maybe we, I don't know if we've scrolled down enough.
Let me see. There were just a couple other thoughts in the beginning. The remarkable ability for Dr. Eger to draw deeply from her life experiences and use those challenging experiences to help others and herself.
Yeah, and then that triggered me that the other thing was how she is able to work with her patients. Was I think the other theme that came up earlier about how she was able to look at patients where she thought she may have an initial bias against them, that she knew that her role as a therapist was to put her biases aside, see what she had in common with her patients. And the other theme that she talks about is that there's no hierarchy of suffering, that the suffering that she experienced wasn't any greater than the suffering of any of her patients. And I think I'd like actually a response to that in the chat chat room, please. She talks about the hierarchy of suffering and that you really can't judge anybody's suffering. And given the context of where we are today in the United States and globally about the suffering that's going on, I'm curious what people's thoughts are about the hierarchy of suffering. So we'll give you a minute to respond.
Awesome. And just a friendly reminder to make sure it says to everyone when you're in the chat. That way, if we don't get to all comments, your voice can be heard and everyone can read them.
Looks like Ruth Lindemann is going to be a speaker on a virtual book group in the near future, talking about her books.
Yes, thank you.
So I'm not seeing any responses to hierarchy of suffering. Do you, Wendy?
Not yet, no.
Yeah, okay.
We have a comment. Everyone's suffering is the most important grief, loss incident. As a therapist, it's essential that I remember that message.
Yeah, I think individuals are unique and everybody has their own experience, and there is no right or wrong or no hierarchy. And I would say, and if you're a therapist or a psychologist or a coach like I am, probably one of the biggest things I learned through my coach training is that my job isn't to heal or fix somebody or help rationalize their pain or suffering or their situation, is to really be with that person and let them feel and express what they're feeling and allow them to process that, and that individuals are creative, resourceful, and whole, and that they have the power within themselves to help themselves. Now, getting and having somebody to process that is important, but the power lies within, and I think that's what Dr. Eger speaks about so elegantly, that you have a choice about how you can't always control what happens to you, but how you respond is where you have the choice. I'm going to read a passage, one that really, or something that resonated with me in the book. And in the book, there are many powerful and profound moments of healing for Dr. Eger. And the two examples I can think of is one when she goes to Hitler's home and she stands at his former home and she yells that she forgives him. Or the moment in the book that was just that really resonated for me is that when she goes back to Auschwitz and that's when she reveals in the book that when she and her mother and sister were standing in the selection line, when Mendel asked, is she your mother or your sister? She responds with mother, and then quickly realizes that had she responded with sister, that her mother may have had a chance of living. But the choice, she made a choice to forgive herself, and it took her years, and it took a lot of hard work. And I'm curious what moments like that resonated with each of you in the book.
Sid, I think we should try something.
Okay.
Because I know that people have a lot to say, and it's hard because some of the questions take a lot of typing, and I don't want to miss anything. So I'm going to suggest that we give it a stab on this first inaugural book club and let folks raise their hand. On the bottom of your chat, there is an ability to raise your hand. And when you raise your hand, I will see it, and I will unmute you and allow you to talk. And hopefully we can work that out and make sure. We might not be able to take all comments because we might need to move on to something else, but we will take a few and go from there. Does that sound like a good plan, everybody? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for working with us. And you don't have a raise the hand icon. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, for some people who they don't have it, turn your video on, and this is what I'm gonna do. We're gonna ask a question, and you can actually, if you have a raise the hand function, please use it. If you don't, just actually raise your hand, and we'll try it that way. Sound like a plan?
Wendy, something else, another option could be, I'm seeing at the bottom there's reactions, and there's a clap or a thumbs up. So if you click on reactions and do thumbs up, we could perceive that, we could take that as your raised hand.
It's another way.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
In the meantime, I see that Mary Abbott if Mary Abbott is willing to speak to her comment that she texted, maybe we can give Mary the floor.
Great, let me find her here.
And then Kristen Hotzak is saying that raise hand is under participants. And I'm gonna look to see it.
All right, I do have Mary unmuted if she would like to share some thoughts.
Well, right in the beginning of the book, I think it was in the first introduction maybe, where she talks about the session with a client, and I don't remember what his problem was, but it was so minuscule compared to what she has had, what she's been through. And she just saw it as an equal experience to hers in terms of his suffering. It was her suffering, and that just pulled me right into the book. And this book just changed my life. It was there's so much to say about it. So I guess that's enough, because there's a lot more. Maybe I'll raise my hand again, but I'm thrilled you're doing this, and I love hearing everyone else's comments. Thank you.
So I'm curious, you said it changed your life, and I'm just curious, like, so can you share with us a little bit about what specifically?
Yes. You know, I think I've spent a lot of my life being a victim. Just like people wouldn't perceive me and my personality that way, but I think that I have perceived myself that way for a lot of my life. And so there have been these incremental periods of moving less and less in that direction, being less and less of a victim to life. But there was something about how she continually came back to the triggers, because we all get triggered. We've all had our traumas, and she would then work with it. She wouldn't run away with it. She wouldn't try to get rid of it. She would work with it, and she would say, okay, I have a choice here. I have a choice how to react. And you know, the timing for me was just great because I realized, wow, I don't have to be a victim to, you know, whatever was going on. I can make a choice, and yes, it triggers me, and now I'm gonna make a different choice in how I carry that.
Yeah.
And that was huge. And I just kept reading over the sections where she gives stories of her experiences, you know, like the siren and going to Auschwitz and all these times, even as a very old woman, still getting triggered and still hanging in there with herself and making the choice.
Yeah. And just first of all, thank you for sharing what you did. And I think it's very brave of you to be on a call and say, hey, you know, I've lived my life a bit as a victim and this changed your life. So I just want to acknowledge that. I think that's brave, and thank you for your transparency in this. So thank you for that. It reminds me, in the book, she writes, and I'm going to quote, where does our power reside? Is it enough to find our inner strength, our inner truth, or does empowerment also require that we take action on the outside? I do believe what's happening inside that matters most. I also believe in the necessity of living in congruence with our values and our ideals, with our moral selves. I believe in the importance of defending what is right and defying what is unjust and inhumane, and I believe in choices. So I guess my question to the group is, what do you think? Is it enough to find the inner strength and leave it at that? Or do you think that once you find your inner strength, that you have to take action on the outside? And why? And this is probably a raise your hand question.
Yes, so again, under participants, there is a raise your hand function. We do have a hand raised by Mimi Bryn. I'm gonna unmute you, Mimi, and see if you have a comment. And if not, we will move to the next hand. All right, Mimi, we can hear you. Are you there, Mimi? Okay, we will wait on that then.
Does anybody else have thoughts on that particular passage while we wait for Mimi? Okay, then we may move on, and if Mimi comes back, we'll take her. Because then there's another passage that I thought resonated with me as well, that I'm hopeful people have a response to. Is she writes, "The most important truth I know, that the biggest prison is in your mind, and in your pocket you already hold the key, the willingness to take absolute responsibility for your life, the willingness to take risk, the willingness to release yourself from judgment and reclaim your innocence, accepting and loving yourself for who you really are, human, imperfect, and whole." And that passage really resonated with me. And it's kind of a bummer, right? Because what she's saying is, you have a choice and you can't blame others for what you experienced and blame people for your past. It's easy to be a victim, right? And complain about what's happened to you and have this helplessness and complain about it and have this woe is me. And what she's telling us here is, darn it, you have a key in your pocket that can unlock the prison that's in your mind. And you have this ability within yourself to unleash yourself. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts about Dr. Eger's comment about the biggest prison being in your mind? I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
All right, we have someone raising their hand. Martha, I'm going to unmute you. There's a little delay.
Okay.
All right, Martha.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
I think that that issue is a major issue throughout our lives. It can start in grammar school and go out throughout your lives. And the judgment aspect really is a self-limiting belief. I volunteer, I lead discussion groups on books with several book groups, and I am teaching in my temple the third year a memoir writing class.
Wow.
And the most common self-limiting belief is the people say, I can't write. I've never written my life. And the people who write the most astounding things are some of those same people. So the proof is in the pudding. And I think for me, that's probably the most significant area, that you have to believe in you and unlock it yourself.
Yeah. And it's interesting, right, that in the end, out of the three sisters, you know, Dr. Eger, when she was a child, was kind of known as the quiet one, right? Her other two sisters kind of took, Magda was the pretty one, and the other Clara was the violinist. That Dr. Eger was the one that was kind of the quiet in the background child, and now she's evolved to become, you know, she's this book, and she's got a second book coming out soon called The Gift, and she's becoming this world-renowned author about her story, and who would have thought? So thank you, Martha, for that. The other question I have is, what do you think it requires a person what do you think it requires a person to feel, think, or do to use the key that she claims you already have in your pocket to release yourself from your own prison? So what do you think it requires a person to think or feel or do?
Do you want me to respond to that, or this is general?
You or anybody else to raise your hand?
We have someone else who has, but if you would like to say something first, Martha, and then we'll go to Lori.
I just think that you have to suspend disbelief, and if, for instance, in terms of writing or anything you do, whether it's crocheting or writing or painting or whatever, is Nike, just do it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Lori, we put you're ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, my mom, you know, she was a young child with, you know, Holocaust survivor. She has not let go of the past. So she has trouble all these years living in the present. And she can't move forward. She's frozen in that time, and everything reminds her, like, you know, what's going on now, with the, you know, what we're dealing with now politically and all that. And it's very hard for her, and that's something she could not unlock to go forward, and that's just a tragedy. So,
yeah, it's interesting. One of the techniques I use with people that I coach, and again, it's not anywhere near what Dr. Eger went through. A lot of what I do has to do with workplace and executive coaching and supervisor and direct report relationships. But individuals will complain about his or her boss. And the question that I always will use then is, well, and if you were to confront your boss, what's the worst thing that will happen? You know, and they'll say, well, you know, I may get fired. I'm like, well, what's the worst thing that could happen if you get fired? Well, you know, I'd have to find another job. And we follow this train of what's the worst thing that can happen. And usually where that line of questioning leads to is, gosh, you know what, the worst thing that can happen is that one, I may get out of this miserable situation. You know, first of all, if I address it, something could be done about it with the individual that I'm in conflict with, or I may find a job that, you know, if I get fired, I may find a job that's more fulfilling. All this to say that helping a person process through kind of what's the worst thing that can happen when they kind of confront some of their challenges, sometimes the reality of what's going to happen is not nearly as bad as what that person perceives is actually going, you know, what could happen.
Thank you, Sid. We have another comment from Sandy. Sandy, you're on.
Hi, I have some concerns with the equivocation that I hear going on from some people on the phone, and maybe it's just my own background as a survivor's child, that we're saying any trauma you have to consider equal to it. I don't believe that. Losing your job, you might go hungry, you don't have someone pointing a gun at you. It's a very different experience, and I just have trouble with the idea of equating all trauma equally. And I'd like to do a shout out to the woman who said her mother's still living in the past. I know that when Trump was elected, sorry to be political here, I'm just talking about some of the things that people are seeing as fascist, that I was very glad my father was dead, because he would have equated those two things. And what we're hearing from the survivor community is when all this is going on, when they're seeing the protesting on the streets, when they're seeing all these things, their nightmares, some of whom are coming back. So as she explained, she's got to constantly re-deal with this. It's not a trauma that you just get to put aside and it goes away and never resurfaces.
Thank you, Sandy. Any other thoughts? All right.
Yeah, I just see the comment from Joyce. I see the comment from Joyce that in the chat says, survivors work so hard to keep the feelings far away and locked in a box, the symptoms, and if you touch the key, those things must come to the front and you must feel them. And I think, you know, Joy's comment in the chat box resonates with me because, you know, Dr. Eger in the book talks about how it wasn't until later in life that she didn't allow herself to really process her feelings and express that feeling. And she, you know, I think at one point in the book, she talks about how she sees her therapist and, like, right, she has a therapist, her therapist like pin her to the ground. She's actually able to scream and express her rage. So where she came to the front and she allowed herself to feel them. And then thinking later on in the book, she talks about how she has a patient who was sexually molested by her father, and she allows that patient to express her anger. And I think she even brings in like a boxing bag into the therapy to allow her patient to confront them and feel that anger and rage.
We have one more comment from Mary. I'm going to unmute you, Mary.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I wanted to say two things that, you know, I've heard a lot where people say it's the key is in your pocket kind of a thing, you know, it's there all along. And that is true. But the thing is, you can't just say, okay, now I'm going to do it. Or I hear what Martha's saying, the just do it thing. But if you're paralyzed with fear and trauma, there are more steps to be taken before you can just do it. You know, and I think that's what her whole book is about, is the process of moving through the terrible experiences to reckoning with yourself, to finding your self-confidence and your ability to then be confronted with your experience and say, I'm not going to react to it the way I used to react to it. I'm not going to carry it the way I did before. And then you have the chance to write or pursue whatever, has challenged you, or whatever you felt you weren't up to. The other thing I was going to say is that I don't believe in her book she's saying that traumas are equal. No one would ever equate what she's gone through with the loss of a job, or even the loss of your spouse. There's just no equating those tangible experiences. But I think she gets to this point she has so much compassion for her own suffering that she can recognize in other people their own suffering for whatever they're suffering about. So, it's not the same. Nothing's the same as what she's gone through. It's sort of like loss. People, someone has a certain loss. Maybe it's their dog. Maybe it's their spouse. You get to a point where you go, loss is loss that leaves a hole in your life. And I think that's where she got to with suffering. It wasn't about the tangibles. It was the human experience.
Yeah.
That's all. I won't say any more.
No, thank you. I will say I like the interaction. I like the interaction of being able to hear people's voices. So thank you.
Yeah, this is nice. Yeah.
For sharing. So.
Yeah. I'm in California, by the way.
Oh wow. Well, thank you. Good. So I am curious, based on what we were just saying, and this kind of goes back to the individual that talked about the hierarchy of suffering, and how do you think her point of view about you having the key in your pocket to unlock yourself from prison, how do you think her point of view resonates with other Holocaust survivors or family of descendants or victims of hate crimes right now? How do you think her perspective resonates with those individuals? And this is to the group. Does everybody feel that the prison is in their own mind, or just thinking about the landscape in the USA right now and the whole movement that's happening?
And just a reminder that your raise the hand function is underneath your participants.
So I'm going to take a little bit of a gamble, Wendy, and I am going to open it up. And I'm curious if because I see we have 10 minutes left and we have a closing question, but I'm curious if there are things that you all are interested in, some topics on the book that we haven't touched on that you want to talk about, or things that you thought we would talk about that we haven't touched on yet. So I'm going to kind of turn the driver's seat and ask you to give us some of you that are on to throw out a question or a topic for us to discuss that's on your mind.
All right. I'm unmuting you, Sheila Stein. Welcome.
Hi. I was kind of thinking this from the beginning of your talk. The book to me was an amazing book that hit me on many, many levels. And at least part of me thought, I can't speak for everyone, but I certainly wonder if others would agree. It was so personal and it hit on so many different levels. It was very hard to discuss. It was very hard to say, oh yes, I've been through this and so I can relate. Or again, from a personal experience, I've got several areas that are related to me very personally. And honestly, it was definitely one of the best books I've ever read, but it's hard to talk about.
It is probably one of the few books that I've read where there's certain parts where I would really laugh, and then I was reading it actually last year in spring break in Florida, where I was sitting at the beach and like tears were just streaming down my face. And it's interesting. I read it a year ago, and then in preparation for tonight, as I'm sure most of you do, it's difficult to get out of the house. I've been listening to the audio book while I've been going on long walks. And when she gets to that part at the end of the book where she talks about going back to Auschwitz, and she finally reveals that, you know, she responded by saying mother instead of sister, and the guilt that she lived with all her life. Tears were still streaming down, you know, tears were just streaming down my face, and it made me think about how I'm sure there are parts of the book that all resonate with us or touch us on some level. Just a deeply touching book.
That's for sure.
She writes, let me see, I see we have 5 minutes left, so I want to, actually, why don't we do this kind of for our closing question, and I'd love to hear from as many of you as possible. There's so much in the book, right? It's difficult to touch on all the elements that she talks about or addresses in the book, and the book is full of advice, and I'm curious what advice was most relevant to you? What was most helpful to you about the book?
I have somebody, Darlene, I think you're raising your hand, right? So I'm gonna unmute you.
I found it amazingly powerful. I love this book. And I'd recently read the Viktor Frankl book as well. I thought it was amazingly powerful how she was what she talked about, how in every moment we make our own choice of how we're going to react to things, that we can't control our environment, but we can control how we react to our environment. And to be reminded of that during this time was really important for me, and it's helping me personally cope with things in the situation that we're in. I'm not saying that all traumas are the same, they certainly aren't, but the coping skills that and tools that she provides you in the book as a way to cope with whatever trauma it is that you're experiencing, that's what I found so powerful about the book. So yeah. I appreciated that you chose this book as one to read, especially at this time. So thank you.
Yeah, just on that, I want to go back to what other people took away from as well, but I'm curious, and while you were speaking, why do you feel it's so relevant at this time?
That at this time, with the pandemic being something that I can't control, how I spend my day, how I choose to spend my day, how I choose to relate to people, that's still in my control. How I choose to manage it, that's in my power. So I don't have to feel, even though I can't control the pandemic, I can control my reaction. And so I'm here. This every day I want to know something when I go to bed that I didn't know when I woke up. So that's a personal goal. But for her to remind me that that is still my power in a time when I was feeling less powerful than I have in the past, or less in control, that was a very powerful. I'm not equating our experiences. They're certainly not the same. It's the tool bag that she provides for you that you can take into different situations.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Who else would like to speak? What did you take away from the book that was most helpful? No one else?
we got someone. Hang on one moment. Kristen, I'm unmuting you.
I'll echo what the last speaker said, just the power of choice that you have. You are able to conquer anything if you are focused on that your inner thoughts, and you can, that prison, if you can get out of it by using the key and making, even the smallest choices become very impactful when they're compounded together. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. So to your point about, that we all have a choice, and it's, this is such a time of reflection, and we all seem, that it's actually amazing how liberating the power of choice is. And the power of choice can be small and great, but freeing your mind is so much what she talks about, and freeing yourself from the past, that I find it both liberating and frankly, it's also scary as heck, because again, it goes to this point, is that it's all up to us, right? To take care of ourselves and move forward. So anyway, I'm glad you all enjoyed the book. I'm glad you all read it, and I'm very grateful that each of you also chose to participate, during this inaugural book group discussion. Admittedly, it's a challenge because there's so much in the book to talk about. It's a challenge to keep it limited to an hour, and I know we still have 46 people, so it's a big audience. But I'm very grateful to have spent this hour with each of you.
Sid, I just want to give Joy, she had her hand up. I want to let her comment before we close.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to say everything in the book really touched me deeply, but I think the thing that really came to mind was that we still have some survivors, and they still have so much to teach us, and we still need to ask questions. I think about Aaron and all the questions I wish I would have asked him and that I'll never know. And I think about all the questions that are left to ask Sam or Fritzy. And I guess it's a reminder for me to really ask those questions. And I think of all the questions I could have asked my parents and other people around me. So it was a reminder that I have a choice. I have a choice to touch the past and make it part of my present. And I think that was what was the most touching to me, was that we have the choice to learn from their lessons. And can I also say thank you for the wonderful job you did and Wendy did.
Oh, you're very welcome, and thank you.
On that note, I just want to say that this was our first time. So a huge shout out, I think it was to Mary, suggesting that we switch from the chatting. And we want to continue offering the very best book clubs that we can. So if anyone has any additional feedback about just how it worked tonight, I'm putting my email in the chat. It's wendy.singer@ilhmec.org. And Sid, do you have anything else you'd like to share before I close with some announcements?
No, again, I just want to thank everybody for reading the book and participating, and just a reminder to yourself constantly that you have a choice. Be and do well. I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful. Sid, you are awesome, and you just radiate positivity, and I just thank you for being a volunteer at the museum and helping us with this. So thank you, and thanks to all of you. And I hope you come and spread the word that Dr. Eger will be with us live. And I'm not going to sleep the night before. That's how excited I am that she is coming. It's on July 16th. You can find all of our programs coming up on our events page. You can Google Illinois Holocaust Museum events, but I'm going to put it in the chat too. One moment. There we go. I'm going to put it in the chat in case anyone wants to click on it. But we have lots of great events coming up. And we have one more super exciting thing, our next book club next month. And that will be posted on our website. I don't think the date has been 100% confirmed. I think it might have just been confirmed today. But our next book will be the New York Times bestseller, Lilac Girls. And here's the best part. The author, Martha Hall Kelly, will be the moderator. So that's pretty cool and pretty amazing. And, oh, thank you, Darlene. I said it wrong. Our Dr. Eger program is June 16th. So thank you. It takes a village. And we will see everybody. Thank you for being with us virtually. I think this was such an opportunity that we have people, as we see, from all over the country who were able to join us. So we hope to see you again. Please join us virtually, and we hope to see you again in person sometime soon. Thanks. Have a great night.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.